October 1944. High above northern Europe, the war feels almost routine. 5 Allied fighters circle at altitude, their engines steady, the sky calm and clear. Below them, clouds stretch like a pale ocean. For a moment, there's nothing but the familiar rhythm of patrol, scanning the horizon, listening to the radio, waiting. Then, something cuts through the sky. It is not loud. It does not climb or turn like anything they know. It simply flashes past, a streak of silver moving faster than instinct can process. The pilots barely have time to react. No propeller, no familiar engine sound, no chance to follow. The aircraft dives away at a speed that makes pursuit meaningless, leaving only thin exhaust trails that fade almost as quickly as they appeared. One pilot tries to speak, then stops, unsure how to describe what he's just seen. For years, Allied intelligence had whispered about German jet aircraft, blueprints, rumors, intercepts. But rumors are safe. Rumors do not tear through the sky faster than anything you can fly. This one does. Within seconds, it is gone. In the cockpits, the silence feels heavier than the engines. Every pilot understands the same terrifying truth at once. If that aircraft chooses to attack, there is nothing they can do to stop it. Later that day, bomber crews hear the reports, mechanics hear them, intelligence officers hear them, and the story spreads with a single question no one can answer yet. If Germany now flies faster than anything the Allies can chase, what happens next? At first, the reports sound exaggerated. Pilots describe impossible speeds. Ground crews shake their heads. Intelligence officers compare notes, searching for errors. But within days, the sightings multiply. Different units, different skies. Always the same description: a sleek aircraft, twin exhausts, no propeller, gone before anyone can react. Soon, bomber crews begin to feel it. Flying fortresses that had crossed Europe for months under heavy escort now face something new. The German aircraft do not linger. They slash through formations at terrifying speed, fire briefly, and vanish before escort fighters can close the distance. There is no dogfight, no warning, only sudden holes torn into tight bomber boxes. For years, Allied air power had rested on a hard-won truth: control the sky, and you control the war below. That control had been paid for with thousands of aircraft and tens of thousands of lives. Now, for the first time since air superiority was achieved, it feels fragile again. High Command understands what is at stake immediately. If Germany can field these aircraft in meaningful numbers, the bombing campaign could collapse. Factories deep inside the Reich would survive. Ground offensives would lose their shield. The long road to victory could stretch even further. Yet the jet does not appear everywhere. There are gaps. Long hours with no sightings at all. Intelligence analysts begin to notice patterns, not in the attacks themselves, but in where the jets come from and where they go when they leave. Every sighting ends the same way. The aircraft does not circle, it does not pursue, it does not stay. It always runs, straight and fast, but back toward a handful of airfields inside Germany. And slowly, a dangerous idea begins to take shape. The jet is unmatched in speed, uncatchable in the air, but speed alone cannot protect it forever, because no matter how advanced it is, every aircraft must eventually return to the ground. To German engineers and planners, the aircraft had once seemed like the answer to everything. It was called the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. On paper, it was revolutionary. Twin jet engines, swept wings, a top-speed, no-piston engine fighter could approach. While Allied aircraft clawed their way through the sky, the Me 262 simply surged forward, turning altitude into dominance and speed into survival. German propaganda embraced it immediately. This was the aircraft that would restore control of the air, the machine that would tear through bomber formations untouched, the weapon that would force the Allies to slow their advance or stop it entirely. For the pilots selected to fly it, the experience felt unreal. They accelerated down the runway, engines howling unlike anything they had known before, and within seconds they were climbing faster and higher than any enemy could follow. In level flight, Allied fighters became distant shapes, trapped in a different era of aviation. Against bombers, the advantage was even more dramatic. The Me-262 could attack from any direction it chose, head-on, from above, from below. Its heavy cannon tore apart aircraft that never had time to react. Then, with a slight push of the throttles, the jet would simply leave, immune to pursuit. To those who watched it fly, the conclusion seemed obvious. This aircraft had arrived too late to win the war quickly, but not too late to change it. Yet beneath the sleek skin and breathtaking performance, the Me-262 carried a burden no one could see from the outside. Its engines were miracles of engineering and prisoners of reality. Germany lacked the materials to build them properly. Heat-resistant alloys were scarce. Skilled labor was vanishing. Fuel supplies were shrinking under constant bombing. Every hour the jet spent in the air consumed resources Germany could no longer afford to lose. Pilots learned quickly that the aircraft demanded care, not aggression. The engines could not be pushed suddenly. Throttles had to be eased forward with patience. Any mistake risked catastrophic failure. A moment of impatience could destroy the engine or the aircraft before combat even began. What made the Me-262 terrifying in the sky also made it fragile everywhere else. It was not a machine built for a long war, and soon the Allies would discover exactly where its brilliance ended. For all its speed, the Me-262 shared one unavoidable truth with every aircraft ever built. It had to take off, and it had to land, and during those moments, speed meant nothing. The jet's engines, so powerful in the air, were weakest close to the ground. From a standstill, they took time to build thrust. Long, exposed seconds passed as the aircraft rolled down the runway, accelerating slowly, locked into a straight line with no room to maneuver. Unlike piston fighters, the Me-262 could not leap into the sky. Its wings were heavily loaded, its landing gear fragile, its engines temperamental. The pilot could not slam the throttles forward without risking engine failure. Everything had to be done carefully, gently, even as enemy fighters might already be watching. Those 30 seconds on the runway were the most dangerous of a jet pilot's life. Landing was no safer. After short missions dictated by fuel shortages, Me-262 pilots returned home with tanks nearly empty. They had no reserve for a second attempt, no option to break away and climb if danger appeared. Gear down, flaps extended, speed bleeding away. The aircraft became predictable, committed, and exposed. The jet that ruled the sky now flew straight and slow. Allied intelligence began to understand what this meant. The Me-262 could not operate from just anywhere. Its engines required specialized fuel. Its maintenance demanded specific facilities. That forced the jets to return again and again to the same handful of airfields, places the Allies could identify, map, and watch. Every mission followed the same invisible funnel: high-speed attack, immediate withdrawal, return to a known base. The realization was unsettling and electrifying. No Allied fighter could chase the jet in the air, but they did not have to. They only had to wait, because the most advanced aircraft in the world was defenseless during the one moment it could not avoid, and someone would have to be bold enough to test that truth. Urban Ben Drew was only 21 years old when the jet war reached him. He was young, aggressive, and already known for pushing limits. A Mustang pilot with the 361st Fighter Group, Drew flew like someone who believed hesitation was more dangerous than risk. That attitude had earned him victories and trouble. Only days earlier, he had been grounded, facing disciplinary action for celebrating a kill too enthusiastically. It was a small offense in a brutal war, but it placed his future in doubt at exactly the wrong moment, because Drew had already seen the jet. On a previous mission, he had encountered a German aircraft unlike anything he had ever faced. He survived long enough to study it, to watch how it moved, how it entered combat, and how it escaped. When intelligence officers began asking for pilots who understood the new threat, Drew's name resurfaced immediately. He did not describe the Me-262 as invincible. He described it as dangerous, but predictable. Drew understood something others were only beginning to accept. Chasing the jet was pointless. Trying to outfly it was suicide. The only chance was patience, waiting until the aircraft had no room left to use its greatest strength. When reports arrived of multiple jets operating from a specific airfield deep inside Germany, Drew volunteered without hesitation. He knew exactly what the mission required. They would have to fly into heavily defended airspace. They would have to ignore flak. They would have to attack aircraft on or near the ground. It was not heroic air combat. It was calculated, ruthless, and unforgiving. But Drew also knew something else. If the theory was wrong, none of them would come back. On the afternoon of October 7, 1944, Urban Drew led his flight toward a German airfield known to host jet fighters. The weather was clear, visibility was good, dangerous conditions for anyone flying low and slow. Drew kept his Mustangs high as they approached, scanning constantly. Then he saw them. Two Me-262s sat on the runway, engines already running, preparing for takeoff. There was no time to debate, no second chance. Drew pushed his nose down and dove. The Mustang screamed toward the ground, speed building rapidly as gravity did what the engine could not. Below him, the first jet began its takeoff roll, accelerating, but not fast enough. Drew opened fire from long range, tracers stitched across the runway and into the right engine of the Me-262. The jet lurched violently, but its speed was already too high to abort. It staggered into the air on one engine, helpless and bleeding energy. Drew closed the distance and fired again. The jet rolled inverted and crashed into trees beside the airfield, erupting in flame. The second Me-262 tried to escape. Its pilot attempted to abort the takeoff, but the aircraft was already moving too fast to stop safely. Drew pulled out of his first pass, banked hard, and came back through a storm of flak. Black bursts filled the air around his Mustang as German guns finally found their range. He ignored them. Drew fired again, walking rounds into the second jet as it struggled to turn off the runway. The aircraft erupted in fire, sliding to a halt in a twisted wreck. In less than 2 minutes, 2 of Germany's most advanced fighters were destroyed, not in the sky, but on the ground. The escape was chaos. Flak tore through the air. Drew's wingman was hit and forced down, captured before he could confirm what had happened. Drew himself barely made it out, flying low and fast until the guns fell silent. Back at base, there was no celebration. Drew's gun camera had failed. There were no photographs, no witnesses who made it home. The moment that proved the jet could be beaten almost vanished into paperwork. Recognition would come decades later. But the lesson was immediate. The future of air combat had just burned on a German runway. Urban Drew's attack did not remain secret for long. Within days, intelligence summaries circulated quietly through fighter groups across England. There were no headlines, no public announcements, just a simple conclusion buried in after-action reports. The jet could be killed, not by chasing it, not by matching its speed, but by denying it the one thing it always needed: time. Mustang pilots began to change the way they flew. Instead of clinging tightly to bomber formations at all times, selected flights were allowed to range farther. They loitered near known jet bases high above flak belts, watching patiently. Hours could pass without contact. Fuel ticked down, nerves tightened. Then, suddenly, a silver shape would appear. The rule was simple: never follow the jet upward, never chase it across the sky. Wait. When the Me-262 turned for home, the hunt began. The P-51 Mustang was perfectly suited to the task. It could stay airborne far longer than any German fighter. With drop tanks, pilots could wait near jet bases for hours. When the moment came, they traded altitude for speed, diving hard to briefly reach velocities that made interception possible. What followed was brutal. Jets were caught on final approach, gear down, flaps extended, committed to landing. Others were hit during takeoff, engines still struggling to build thrust. In those moments, the jet's revolutionary speed vanished completely. The Luftwaffe reacted as quickly as it could. Heavy flak corridors were built around jet bases. Fighter cover was assigned. Takeoff times were randomized. Decoys were used to draw attackers into traps. Some jets were dispersed to improvised runways along German autobahns. None of it solved the core problem. The Me-262 could outrun anything in the sky, but it could not outrun mathematics. It had to take off, it had to land, and the Allies were waiting. What began as a gamble had become doctrine, and soon, even Germany's best pilots would feel the consequences. 1 month after Urban Drew's attack, the lesson reached another pilot who understood patience as well as aggression: Chuck Yeager. In November 1944, Jaeger was flying escort over Germany when Me-262s struck the bomber stream. As always, the jets attacked at tremendous speed, fired briefly, and climbed away untouched. Standard procedure said to regroup and continue the mission. Jaeger did something else. He watched the jets disappear, and then he turned away from the bombers. Jaeger knew what others were beginning to learn. The jet's speed was useless once its fuel ran low, and fuel ran low quickly. He descended through cloud layers, dropping toward a known jet airfield. Below him, the landscape opened into runways, hangars, and flak positions already alert and searching the sky. Then, he saw it. A single Me-262 was on final approach, landing gear down, flaps extended. Its speed was bleeding away as it committed fully to the runway ahead. The German pilot never saw Jaeger. The Mustang dived hard, gravity pushing it beyond speeds no level flight could achieve. Jaeger lined up the shot and fired. Tracers walked into the jet's wing and fuselage. The Me-262 rolled, lost lift, and plunged into the ground short of the runway. There was no time to celebrate. Flak batteries erupted instantly. Shells burst around Jaeger's aircraft as he roared straight down the runway at treetop height, using speed as his only defense. Only after clearing the far end of the field did he pull up and escape into the countryside. Later, Jaeger described the encounter with characteristic understatement. "First time I saw a jet, I shot it down. What mattered was not the quote. What mattered was the pattern." The theory had been proven again, calmly, deliberately, and without heroics. The jet could be beaten by those willing to wait. By early 1945, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The Me-262 was still deadly when it reached the bombers. Individual pilots continued to score victories. Bomber crews still feared the sudden flash of silver and the brief burst of cannon fire. But the numbers no longer worked in Germany's favor. Jets were being lost faster than they could be replaced, not only in combat, but on the ground, during takeoff, landing, and maintenance accidents. Engines failed after only a handful of hours. Aircraft sat idle, waiting for parts that never arrived. Fuel shortages grew worse by the week. Synthetic fuel plants were bombed relentlessly. What little jet fuel remained was carefully rationed, forcing pilots to fly short missions with no margin for error. Every takeoff became a risk, every landing a commitment that could not be undone. The pilots themselves were irreplaceable. Me-262 units were filled with experienced aviators, many of them veterans with years of combat behind them. When one was killed or captured, Germany did not just lose an aircraft, it lost hundreds of hours of training and experience that could not be replaced. And all the while, Allied strength kept growing. Thousands of Mustangs filled the skies. They did not need to win every engagement. They only needed to be present over jet bases, over runways, over the last narrow paths the Me-262 had left. Germany had built a glimpse of the future, but it was fighting the present. Speed could no longer compensate for shortages, for attrition, or for overwhelming numbers. The jet's promise was real, but it was unsustainable. By the spring of 1945, the question was no longer whether the Me-262 could change the war. It was how long it could survive it all. In the final weeks of the war, Me-262s still flew. Some launched from shattered airfields, others lifted off from sections of Autobahn carved through forests. Pilots flew when fuel was available, when engines worked, when runways still existed. They fought with skill, they fought with courage, and sometimes they won. But nothing they did could change the outcome. The jet had arrived with the promise of the future. Speed beyond imagination, power beyond reach. It proved beyond doubt that air combat had entered a new age. Every nation that studied the Me-262 after the war would carry its lessons forward. Yet, in 1944 and 1945, those lessons came too late. Germany lacked fuel, it lacked trained pilots, it lacked time, and above all, it faced an enemy that had learned faster than expected. American Mustang pilots did not defeat the jet by building a better machine. They defeated it by understanding its limits, by refusing to fight it where it was strongest, and by forcing it into moments where technology offered no escape. Speed did not save the Me-262. Innovation did not save it. What decided its fate was patience, numbers, and relentless pressure. When the war ended, abandoned jets sat silent on broken runways, pushed into trees, or destroyed by their own crews. The aircraft that was meant to sweep the skies ended its days scattered across a defeated nation. The men who flew against it returned home, knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary. They had seen the future arrive early and watched it fail. Not because it was flawed in design, but because wars are not won by machines alone. They are won by the people who learn how to fight them.